We are going to jump into another call, and we have got a caller named Marcus, he, him from Texas. Wants to know, have either of the hosts had experiences where, through either combat or medical circumstances, people changed their religious permissions? And wants to also premise that with if we're allowed to talk about that sort of thing. I appreciate that, Marcus. We wouldn't go into detail that we're not supposed to go into, but I think we can talk about this. So we're happy to have your call. You are on the line with Jimmy and Dr. Ben. How are you?
Good. Just to start off, I want to thank you both for your continuing service, not just to our country, but to the atheist community in general. You guys do a very good job of what you do in both aspects, I feel like. But to get to my question, and it was kind of along the lines, it may be a little more applicable to the actual wording of the question for you, Jimmy. But I was kind of wondering, just in generalized life, I see people who change their religious affiliation because of some significant event that happens in their lives. But I was just kind of wondering, and I don't know, maybe you can change names or circumstances or whatever, but have there been circumstances where, for whatever reason, people are put into a situation that makes them question, much like you said you did when you were injured in that attack? Is that a common thing, or do you find that, or do people even talk about it, I guess? I don't know.
Well, I will answer that in two parts. So, number one, getting to the latter part of your question, I would say that I have not seen a whole lot of people change their religious affiliation based on combat or medically induced trauma, if you will. Typically, that is used to, I would say, establish some kind of confidence or reassure what they already believed. And so that's been my experience. I want to caveat that with, I really don't talk a whole lot with people about their injuries and such. It's kind of a thing that really we don't talk about. Sometimes we'll talk about it with each other, but it's more of like a head nod kind of look in the eye type of thing. Like, you can tell that somebody's been through something and you really don't make them relive that. And to expand on that a little bit, I will say that anytime that I am ever asked some of the more cardinal sins, cardinal violations, if you will, when it comes to asking military members about their service, it usually comes from people who are so far removed from military service. I have been asked, have you ever seen any combat? You ever shot anybody? And it's usually from people who are in portions of society. They're really wealthy. They're really well off. They've never served. They have no family that would have ever served, or they've never heard stories like that. Those are, and I'm kind of painting that with a broad brush, but those are generally the times where I get those questions that you just never ask people. But the people who are more familiar with what goes into kind of living through those experiences, they really don't ask it anyway. And so I don't really have those conversations, whether it's with civilians or military members. I do want to kind of talk about something that did happen on a trip that I was on. It was actually a religious retreat. And so I talked about this. My very first time ever on an ACA production was on Truth Wanted. I was with the great Objectively Dan, and he asked me about some of my experiences. And I talked about this camping trip that I was kind of tricked into, right? So I was brand new in the military, and I was living in the barracks on base, and there was a group that always got together on Fridays. There was this married couple, man and woman, and I really didn't put it together that they were religious or they were representing any kind of church. And so I'd gotten to know them. They always brought food. We were barbecuing, cooking out, things like that. And they invited me on this camping trip. And so I went on this camping trip, and it turned out to be a religious retreat. And there was another kid there that, was religious, kind of, I think he was questioning, but on that very trip where they started, getting into the Bible and asking questions around the fire about, our faith and how we combat evil, how do we avoid giving Satan a foothold on our soul, things like that. They actually made some pretty racist jokes towards Asian people. And that was, needless to say, incredibly off-putting, but eye-opening, because this one kid that I had just mentioned a few moments ago said, whoa, hold on a second. We are supposed to be like this religious group, this like all loving people, and it's okay to make fun of Asian people. And the person in charge, the gentleman who I believe was some kind of pastor, kind of tried to justify it by like, well, it's just a joke. And I was actually pretty impressed. This guy, or this kid, this other military member, challenged him on that, challenged him in front of everybody openly, and told him how wrong he was. And after that, that person continued to question what it was he believed, to the point that a year or so went by and he was no longer religious. He actually identified first as an agnostic and then as an atheist. And I think that experience was a very eye-opening one for him, and caused him to really think about what it is he believes, because of the message that is being portrayed. And I think that also speaks to kind of the ways that we are groomed in this kind of lifestyle as we are raised, right? There are certain things you just never hear about until you actually read the Bible. There are certain stories that they purposely don't teach you in church. And once you hear them, you start questioning things. Well, to hear a clergy member make racist jokes towards Asian people, I think for this person caused him to divert away from his religious upbringing. And so that doesn't really get to your question of medical trauma or combat related issues, but it certainly does encompass a departure from faith for a military member, because they were pretty much let down by their clergy. And so that is my long-winded answer to that. Marcus, thank you for sitting through that. I hope you took something away from that. I want to kick it over to Ben and see if he has anything to add.
I don't really have experiences related to this, because it's not only such a taboo thing to discuss religion, but also because I try to be as neutral as possible in all my medical interactions with people. I think, at least in that standpoint, I haven't seen anything specific. Probably more so with regard to coworkers. It's not anything that like I've specifically done or been around, but just the in med school, some other students, and then now some residents, like as they're around more progressive people and more progressive ideas, I think it's kind of a similar situation to Jimmy's story, just not as obvious. I think the more that these people have spent time around trans people or around people of different cultural backgrounds or different religious backgrounds, even, like I've heard some people ask some very good questions, and especially I've had some Mormons that have asked some very good questions and have um, intentionally stepped into probably uncomfortable situations for them with a goal of understanding. And I don't think necessarily it changed their belief at all, but I wonder if it's slowly working in their brains and giving them different perspectives on these particular issues. For a specific example is in med school, we had an outside of class workshop about contraception and specifically IUDs. It was all about how to place IUDs. And we had like a practice mannequin and stuff. And this was not required at all to do. This was just an outside of class thing. And this Mormon student showed up and he participated and he asked questions. And some of his questions were a little bit weird, but it just showed he didn't have any understanding of the issue. But he asked them and he didn't argue. He wasn't defensive about his responses. He was just there to learn. And similarly, I've had interactions with religious co-residents where they've asked about being trans and certain things in my life. And it's like, I don't know if it's necessarily changed anything for them right now, but it's caused them to think about the differences and think about questions that they want to ask. And they've been brave enough to ask those questions. And I think maybe eventually their minds will change and maybe they'll deconvert at some point. But I don't know for sure. I don't know if they're even on that road, but I think those are more of the realistic examples that I've had experience with. So I don't know if that helped at all. Any
What do you
thoughts?
say, Marcus?
Yeah, it's good. I was just kind of curious because thinking about the question, I feel it's obvious that yes, there are atheists in foxholes. I guess I was thinking of a kind of a related question in are atheists made in foxholes as opposed to starting there as atheist. So, but yeah, I mean, I appreciate all the answers. I'll go ahead and let you guys go. But thanks for the show.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks for calling in.